Welcome to Museum Archipelago. I'm Ian Elsner. Museum Archipelago is your audio guide through the landscape of museums. Each episode is never longer than 15 minutes, so let's get started.
Hello, my name is David Scofield, and I am the director at Meadowcroft Rockshelter and Historic Village in Avella, Pennsylvania. The Meadowcroft Rockshelter is an archaeological site that is now a National Historic Landmark, and it's a site that has provided evidence of people using this as a campsite for at least 16,000 years. It is part of a rock feature, a sandstone overhang, or reentrant, as geologists refer to it, that's situated above Cross Creek. And it just provided a sheltered campsite that people used at least 16,000 years ago, and then all through prehistory and into the historic period.
What other events in world history were going on 16,000 years ago? This was before the invention of things like beer, right?
Absolutely. And there wasn't a lot going on, and particularly in North America, there were, populations were pretty sparse and just small groups of people spread out across the continent. So there really wasn't a lot else going on in North America.
So how was this site discovered? And how do we know that this site is the oldest contender for human habitation in North America?
Albert Miller was the man who discovered the rock shelter. Albert was an interesting man. He was very well read. He was the local historian and an amateur archaeologist. And he always suspected that the rock shelter on his farm would have been used by Indians at some point. And on November 12th, 1955, he was walking through the site and he found a freshly dug groundhog hole. And the groundhog had excavated some artifacts. And Albert thought it was a good opportunity for him to test his theory and enlarge the hole a bit. So he went home and got a shovel and a screen, and he enlarged the hole and found more artifacts, some burnt bones, some flint flakes. At 30 inches deep, he encountered an intact flint knife. So he knew he was right, and he was also wise enough to know that he should keep quiet about it so that the site wasn't looted and destroyed. And so he spent the next 18 years trying to find a professional archaeologist to excavate the site. And that was 1973 when a new faculty member at the University of Pittsburgh happened to be looking for a cave or rock shelter to excavate as part of a field school. And so through a mutual friend, Albert and Dr. James Adavasio were put in touch, and Dr. Adavasio came to the site in the spring of 73 to look at it and immediately realized it's what he was looking for to excavate and asked for permission to do so. And so they had a field school that first summer in 1973. And by 1974, during that second field school season, they got the first radiocarbon dates back from the Smithsonian lab and really blew everyone away. No one anticipated that this site would prove to be as old as it's been demonstrated. And that, of course, touched off quite a firestorm of controversy. It was such a big story that in August of 1974, the Meadowcroft discovery was one of the few things that bumped the Watergate scandal from the front page of the Washington Post. We have a copy that has a story on the front page above the fold, and off to the side in this little sidebar column is something about new tapes being found. So it really was big news at the time. And of course, it flew in the face of the paradigm that's been around for many, many years, for decades.
So the people who inhabited this site came over on the land bridge between Asia and North America. Why aren't the older sites in places like Canada or Alaska? Did those sites just not survive?
In part, yeah. These early sites are rarely found on purpose. They're usually found by accident, as Meadowcroft was. The crossing the land bridge from Asia during the last ice age, when the land bridge, what's known as Beringia, it's the land mass that appeared as sea level dropped because a lot of water was tied up in the glaciers. that was always thought to be the entry route into North America. But that's changing. And over the past number of years, there have been other theories. And now, even with the use of DNA research, that it's really pushing that land bridge crossing kind of down on the list. A Pacific, crossing, kind of hugging the Pacific Rim, coming by boat is a predominant theory. There's also suggestion that perhaps people came across the North Atlantic in a similar fashion, hugging the glacial front and coming across from the Iberian Peninsula. It's not as clear-cut as it used to be thought.
From a little of my own experience, I know that it's often difficult to help guests think of large timescales. How do you manage communicating enormous lengths of time at Meadowcroft?
Yeah, you're exactly right. That is a challenge. And for many years, we really struggled with, because Albert Miller also started his outdoor museum, but he started it 4 years before the professional excavation took place. So he created a museum of rural life, a little 19th century recreated village where he moved in historic structures that were threatened. So we struggled with how to connect a recreated 19th century village with this prehistoric archaeological site. But what we ended up doing is creating other outdoor interpretive areas that kind of connect the dots and really highlight what are the big ideas that radically changed how people lived over that span of time. So at the Rockshelter, we talk about the discovery of the site, the story that I told, and the scientific pursuit of excavation and learning from the site. And we also touch on the hunter-gatherer lifestyle, because those Paleo-Indians were people that had to survive by following food across the landscape. They couldn't stay in one place year-round and survive. So then the next big idea is that agriculture is developed. And in our part of the world, that happened about 3,000 years ago. Now we see in the archaeological record these Monongahela Indian villages where we know that it was an agrarian society, and they were growing corn, beans, and squash, renewable food sources. So they were now able to settle in these villages year-round. The next big idea that really radically changes how people lived was the fact that Europeans now arrived in North America. And so we deal with that in a recreated 18th century frontier area where we talk about the commerce, the commercial revolution and then we have the 19th century rural village to talk about settled 19th century rural life and the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So that's how we're covering that expanse of time. But it is challenging for people to understand how far back 16,000 years is. And one of the things that we're working on right now is developing a vertical timeline for the Rockshelter that will allow visitors to correlate that timeline with the stratigraphy of the site. So we'll have tags that will correspond to periods of time on the timeline that will show major world history events that everybody learned about in school. But the interesting thing is that those major world history events, like the rise and fall of the Roman Empire and building of the Great Pyramids, those are going to be all up near the top of our timeline. So it will emphasize how far back, how much further back the 16,000 years represented at Meadowcroft actually is.
The Meadowcroft Rockshelter and Historic Village opens for its 50th season on May 5th, 2018. The Meadowcroft Rockshelter is part of the Senator John Heinz History Center in Pennsylvania. This has been Museum Archipelago. We hope you enjoyed your visit. As you leave, consider becoming a member of Club Archipelago. In exchange, you'll get a members-only bonus podcast. This week, we visit Tsari Maligrad, a new museum complex in Bulgaria. You can join for $2 a month at patreon.com/museumarchipelago. For more information or to submit feedback, go to museumarchipelago.com or museum_go on Twitter. Next time, bring a friend.